Government files are designed to be boring. They are stacks of dry, yellowing paper filled with bureaucratic jargon, budget requests, and statistics that no one will ever read. They are the ultimate proof of a mundane, logical world. But every once in a while, buried in the darkest corner of a rusted filing cabinet, you find a report that breaks the system. A document that once read completely shatters your faith in the logic. The case we are opening today comes from a classified Home Ministry archive from 1996. It takes place in central India, in a region known as the Chambal Valley. To understand Chambal in the 90s, you have to think of the old, untamed frontiers of the Wild West. It was a vast, lawless expanse of towering dry clay canyons, deep ravines, and suffocating dust. It was an isolated world ruled by generations of outlaws and bandits who hid in the labyrinth of the badlands. Out there, fear wasn't something that jumped out at you from the dark. Fear was a permanent fixture in the air. You breathed in with dust. Into this lawless frontier, the government sent a man named Diwakar Das. Diwakar was a mid-level government clerk. If you met him, you would describe him as a machine. He lived alone in a tiny, sterile apartment in New Delhi. His entire life was dictated by the ticking of a clock. He woke up exactly at 7 a.m., ironed his clothes into razor-sharp creases. He meticulously cleaned the nib of his fountain pen every evening. Diwakar had no imagination. He had no dreams, no superstitions, and absolutely no belief in the supernatural. To him, anything that could not be quantified, measured, or stamped in triplicate was simply nonsense. That absolute, rigid lack of imagination is exactly why the government chose him for this specific assignment. Let's open the file. Diwakar's assignment was highly unusual, but straightforward on paper. He was to travel deep into the Chambal badlands to secure the official surrender signatures of an ancient, highly secretive clan of outlaws. The government didn't consider them normal bandits. According to local legend, this clan operated more like a dark, corrupted brotherhood in the shadows. They had their own ruthless rules, their own bizarre rituals, and a history bathed in blood. Local police refused to go anywhere near their territory. The fear wasn't based on how many guns the clan had. It was based entirely on their leader, a man known only as Rudra Pratap. The official police files listed Rudra Pratap as a 60-year-old fugitive. But if you went to the isolated villages on the edge of the canyons and asked the oldest residents, they would lock their doors and tell you a very different story. The villagers claimed that Rudra Pratap had been alive since 1857. During a violent colonial rebellion that year, the British military had swept through the region, burning villages to the ground. According to the lore, Rudra's entire family was massacred in front of him. Blinded by trauma and a rage that transcended human limits, Rudra fled into the deepest, darkest, unexplored caves of the Chambal. The legend states that in the pitch black of the earth, he performed unspeakable, ancient rituals. He made a dark transaction. He traded his humanity for endurance. When he emerged from the caves years later, he was no longer a man. He had become an apex predator, a cold, calculating entity that no longer required normal food or water to survive. He required human terror. He fed on the raw, vibrating energy of human fear. He didn't operate alone. He had two lieutenants who were equally feared. The first was Bhima, a massive 7-foot-tall giant covered in so many thick, jagged scars that he looked more like a beast than a man. Bhima never spoke. The second was Keshav, the tracker. It was said that Keshav could smell the chemical change in a man's sweat from a mile away if he got scared. Diwakar read these local reports in his Delhi office, scoffed at the superstitious nonsense, packed his leather briefcase, and took a train south. His itinerary was rigid: hike into the designated canyon, spend 1 week at the camp, explain the government's amnesty program, collect the signatures, and return to his sterile apartment in Delhi. He thought he was walking into a standard bureaucratic negotiation. He didn't realize he was crossing the absolute final boundary between the world of men and a world of monsters. The details of that week do not come from an official report. They come from a small, leather-bound personal diary recovered from Diwakar's abandoned apartment 1 month later. This is a direct translation of his descent into madness. Diwakar's first entry is dated November 12, 1996. His handwriting is flawless, clean, straight lines of blue ink. Day 1, 5 p.m. The local police jeep dropped me at the edge of the canyon network. They refused to drive further. The landscape here is oppressive. The clay soil is incredibly fine and dry, almost like ash. The paths wind like a maze between 70-foot-high walls of packed dirt. The dust hangs in the air, blocking out the sun. The air is entirely stagnant. It took 2 hours of walking through this labyrinth to find the camp. Diwakar noted that it wasn't a standard outlaw camp. There were no tents. There were no campfires. It was a massive, sprawling ruin of an ancient stone fortress, half swallowed by the shifting clay of the canyons. The silence here is deeply uncomfortable, Diwakar wrote. There is no chatter, no coughing, no clinking of weapons or pots. It possesses the heavy, dead quiet of a mausoleum. At the ruined archway, I was met by Keshav. The man refused to make eye contact. He kept his head tilted down, staring at the dirt, inhaling deeply through his nose as I approached. Behind him stood the giant Bhima. Bhima did not look at me at all. He stared blankly at the empty path behind me, as if watching a threat that I could not see. That evening, Diwakar met Rudra Pratap for the first time. He expected a loud, aggressive warlord. Instead, he found something deeply unsettling. Rudra Pratap was sitting on a crumbling stone throne in the center of the courtyard, the diary reads. His clothes were faded to the point of being colorless. His skin was stark white, completely bloodless. The most disturbing aspect was his absolute stillness. When I sat in the wooden chair across from him, I realized he was not blinking. I watched his chest for 5 minutes. It did not rise or fall. He was not breathing. He sat like a statue in a museum. Diwakar opened his briefcase and began reading the terms of the government pardon in his flat, monotonous voice. Rudra did not react. He just stared at Diwakar with eyes that looked like deep, black glass. When Diwakar finished, Rudra finally spoke. Diwakar wrote. His voice did not sound like it came from his mouth. It was incredibly heavy, carrying a hollow resonance, as if echoing up from a deep well. He said, "These papers are just dust. This valley does not know your government. It doesn't know your police. This valley only knows hunger, and it only knows time." Diwakar was shown to a small, damp stone cell to sleep in. He went to bed annoyed, assuming they were just using intimidation tactics to negotiate a better deal. But on day 2, the cracks in Diwakar's logical mind began to show. Day 2, 2 p.m. The handwriting is slightly rigid. There are at least 40 men living in this ruin. Yet no one has lit a fire. No one is cooking. I have walked the entire perimeter of the courtyard, and I have not seen a single drop of water being consumed. How are they sustaining themselves? What is the biological fuel source for this camp? He also noted the unnatural environment. In a ruined fort in the wilderness, there should be stray dogs, insects, or the sound of birds. But nothing flew over the ruins. It was like a vacuum. Then came the night of the second day. 11:30 p.m. I am writing this by the light of my flashlight. Something is outside my stone room. It is not walking. There are no footsteps. It is just a sound, a very slow, incredibly heavy dawning of breath. It is circling the perimeter of my walls. Diwakar tried to rationalize it. He wrote that it was probably a large guard dog sniffing out the new stranger. But the ink on the page is smudged, showing his hands were sweating. It is not a dog, he wrote an hour later. The sound of the breathing is not coming from the ground outside my door. It is coming from the top of the wall, near the ceiling. Whatever is out there is clinging to the sheer stone, 10 feet in the air. Diwakar did not open the door. When he emerged the next morning, Rudra Pratap was sitting in the exact same position on the stone throne. The morning dew had settled on his shoulders, proving that he had not moved a single inch the entire night. By day 3, Diwakar's reality began to warp. He tried to stick to his routine. He polished his shoes, cleaned his pen. But when he approached Keshav in the courtyard to demand a meeting, Keshav didn't answer his questions. Keshav just kept staring at the dirt and said in a raspy whisper, "Your sweat is changing, Babu. On the first day, you smelled like city smog, ink and paper. But today, the smell of fear is bleeding through your pores. The sour smell. It is getting stronger. And that is the scent they love the most." Diwakar retreated to his room. His entry for that evening is frantic. "They are not human. I am convinced of it now. I walked past the giant Bhima today. He has been standing in the exact same corner of the courtyard for nearly 18 hours. I stood inches from his face. His eyes were wide open. He did not blink once. Not a single microscopic twitch of the eyelid. This defies biology." On day 4, the final tether to the outside world snapped. Diwakar's silver pocket watch, a mechanical timepiece that had not lost a second in 10 years, simply stopped ticking. In the eternal, sunless, stagnant air of the ruined fort, estimating time became impossible. He also noted that his own hunger and thirst had completely vanished. His stomach felt hollow, yet he had no desire to eat. But something else was replacing it. "There is a smell seeping under my door," he wrote. "It is not the smell of food. It is the sharp, metallic tang of rusted iron and copper. It smells like a slaughterhouse that hasn't been cleaned in a century. It smells like raw, oxidized blood." Later that afternoon, rummaging through some decayed debris in the corner of his cell to distract himself, Diwakar found an old, rotting journal. It belonged to a British military officer from the late 1800s. Reading through crumbling pages, the local legends he had mocked in Delhi suddenly clicked into place. The British officer had written about entire patrols vanishing in these canyons. When the bodies were eventually found, they had not a single drop of blood left in their veins, and their faces were frozen in masks of absolute, mind-shattering terror. Diwakar realized the truth. "They are not negotiating a surrender," he wrote, his pen tearing through the paper. "They have never intended to sign anything. I was not sent here as an ambassador. I was sent here as a meal. They are waiting for me to break." By day 5, Diwakar's logical, machine-like mind was in free fall. The perfectly straight lines of handwriting in his diary were gone. The letters were massive, jagged, and chaotic. He no longer wrote about government policies or escape plans. He only wrote about the suffocating weight of his own terror. The government knew, he scribbled on the afternoon of the 5th day. The men in those air-conditioned offices in New Delhi knew exactly what this place was. They knew what Rudra Pratap was. I am not a peace envoy. I am livestock. These things, they are marinating me. They could have killed me on the first day, but they didn't. They are waiting for my sanity to completely shatter. They prefer the taste of pure, distilled madness. That night, the horror broke through the perimeter. The heavy, drawn-out sound of breathing returned, but this time it was not outside the stone walls. Diwakar was huddled on his small cot, wrapped entirely in a coarse woolen blanket, pulled tight over his head. He was writing in the diary blindly, in the pitch black. It is in my room. The heavy wooden door is still bolted from the inside, but the thing is inside the room. The temperature has plummeted. It feels like I am sitting in a meat freezer. The smell of rusted iron and raw copper is so thick I am choking on it. I will not open my eyes. If I pull this blanket down and look at it, my brain will hemorrhage from the sheer impossibility. It is breathing. It is breathing right over my head. It is suspended from the stone ceiling directly over my bed, just inches from my face. It is inhaling my terror. Diwakar survived the night, but the man who emerged the next morning was fundamentally altered. The human mind is a bizarre defense mechanism. When it is pushed past the absolute limit of fear, past the point where adrenaline and panic can sustain it, it does not always result in screaming or violent hysteria. To protect itself from imploding, the mind sometimes shuts down completely. It crosses a threshold into a cold, dead, absolute calm. Day 6 in Diwakar's diary is the terrifying proof of this psychological death. The chaotic, jagged handwriting from the night before was gone. The entry for day 6 was written in perfect, meticulous cursive. It was as neat and orderly as the letters he used to draft in his sterile city office. But the words themselves were entirely devoid of sanity. I understand the protocol now, Diwakar wrote elegantly. I was never sent here to force their submission to the government. I was sent here to learn their rules. Rudra Pratap is not angry with me. He was simply waiting for the noise of the city to die inside my head, so I could finally appreciate the silence of the clay. The entity that visited my room last night did not harm me. It simply stayed suspended above my bed, and it drank my fear. It drank every last drop of it. Now my vessel is empty. I am perfectly calm. On the afternoon of the 6th day, Diwakar walked out of his cell. He noted that the sun felt entirely devoid of heat. The courtyard was empty. Keshav and Bhima were gone. Only Rudra Pratap remained, sitting perfectly still on his throne of crumbling stone. Diwakar walked right up to him. His diary records this final interaction with chilling detachment. I looked closely into his eyes for the first time. There were no whites in his eyes. They were solid black whites, like polished obsidian. Looking into them, I felt the concept of time moving backward. I could feel the heat of his burning village from a century ago. I could feel the ancient, gnawing starvation. Rudra smiled at me. His teeth were not human. They were translucent and incredibly sharp, like shards of broken glass. But I was not afraid. According to the diary, Rudra spoke only one sentence to Diwakar. He asked, "Is the hunger starting to wake up inside you?" Diwakar's diary reads, "Looking at him, I realized my stomach was finally cramping. But I did not want bread. I didn't want water. I felt an overwhelming, hollow craving to consume the fear of a living thing. Day 7, the final page of the diary. There is no long paragraph. There is no mention of rescue or Delhi or his old life. There is only a single sentence, written with such light pressure that the pen barely scratched the paper. The government assignment is complete. A surrender has been finalized. But it is not theirs, it is mine. I am stepping into the dark. 1 month later, when the Home Ministry realized Diwakar Das was never coming back, they dispatched a heavily armed special task force to the Chambal coordinates. The official police report from the raid states that the STF found the ruined fortress completely abandoned. The courtyard was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. There were no signs of footprints, no signs of recent cooking, and no signs of any struggle. Neither was there any blood. But in the exact center of the courtyard, directly in front of the crumbling stone throne, they found Diwakar's belongings. His leather briefcase was placed neatly on the ground. Resting perfectly on top of the briefcase were his silver pocket watch, his reading glasses, and his small leather diary. In the corner of the courtyard, his government-issued trousers and button-down shirt were folded into immaculate, razor-sharp squares. But Diwakar's body was never found. Not in the ruins, not in the canyons, and not in the surrounding wilderness. The Home Ministry stamped the file, missing, presumed dead, buried it in the archives, and never spoke of the surrender at Chambal. But if you travel to those remote villages on the edge of the badlands today and sit by the fire as the cold wind howls through the canyons, the locals will whisper a very different conclusion. They say that the ancient warlord Rudra Pratap no longer has 2 lieutenants. He now has 3. Bhima, the giant, Keshav, the tracker, and a new entity. A completely naked, emaciated man with no eyes. An entity that stalks the darkest ravines, endlessly scratching perfectly straight, invisible lines into the dry clay with his long, bleeding fingernails. A man whose logical mind broke so completely that to escape his ultimate fear, he became it.